So guys, I do believe it's important because what I saw so much happening initially with Palestine was what we would call genocide denial. Okay. In terms of like everyone would just automatically say, well, this isn't like the Holocaust. This isn't what's happening. Like they're not murdering everyone all at once, but that's not even what happened during the Holocaust. Like the Holocaust was carried over a period of like years. Okay. And so this is the UN definition of what a genocide is. Killing members of a group, seriously or bodily or mental harm to members, um, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction or whole or in part. So that could be blowing up schools, blowing up hospitals, right? Basically shaking the cultural and education foundations of a place. Okay, so when we are going into an area and we are removing their access to clean water, to education, to medicine, to food, that is genocide. Okay. When we are going in and removing cultural landmarks, right, or mosque or churches or anything of that nature, once again, that is genocide. It is removing the soul and essence of a people as well. It is not just the physical destruction, it is a spiritual destruction too. Okay. And, imposing measures intended to prevent births within a group, when you're blowing up every hospital, when you're murdering doctors, when you're murdering journalists, that is keeping a group from being able to sustain itself. Okay. So, like I said, genocide does not happen all at once. And these are the stages. The stages of genocide go very much into like the stages of how anyone would kind of develop like a personality disorder or things of that nature. So first there's classification. We start separating ourselves amongst a different group of people. Okay. This could be along ethnicity, race, nationality. Okay. We've had, Jew versus Aryan, Israeli versus Palestinian. We're just creating separation. Then there's symbolization. We start creating symbols and ways to identify the other person. Because when you think back to Holocaust, you think about when they had to start wearing the Star of David as an identification badge. Palestinians have to kind of always wear like these ID numbers or these what was it? The digital labels in terms of crossing checkpoints and things of that nature. Discrimination. This is when it starts becoming legal and different groups of people start having different rights, different access to education, right? They are held in different court systems, different rules and laws apply to them. Then becomes a dehumanization stage. This is when we start using language so that the other group of people is no longer seen as humans. They are called vermin, parasites, insects, right? Basically, the human qualities of this group of people are taken away. If you hear the way that Israelis talk about Palestinians, it is very present. And not only is it present amongst the regular populace, it's present amongst government officials. It's present amongst children. I watched a video where this kid said, we learned in Torah class that Palestinians aren't people. Okay? Because the more that we dehumanize an entire group of people, the more that we are disconnected from our humanity, from our heart, and we are numbed out to the atrocities that were occurring to them. Then there's the organization stage. This is when we start like organizing armed militias, okay? And we start going into their territories, we start taking their children, we just start enacting physical violence on a different group of people, oftentimes for fighting for their own equal rights and sovereignty. Polarization. This is when people who are moderates, right, or those who want to speak out against what's going on are often silenced. Okay. And so you see a lot of these shaming tactics already happen. If you go and speak against children being murdered in Palestine, you're already anti-Semitic, right? There's no nuance. Everything is binary into its extremes. If you are going to speak up on behalf of this other group of people that we have already dehumanized, you are now bad and you are now targeted. Your families could be targeted, right? You could be canceled. You can be shadow banned on social media, right? Anything to make sure that you are scared for speaking up on what's going on. Eventually, there's a stage called preparation, which is where people are now being forcibly relocated. They are being moved away from their homes. They are being moved into quote unquote evacuation zones. Okay. But basically, you are uprooting people from their homes and then just placing them in these different areas, sometimes even ghettos. And so, yes, eighth stage is persecution. This is when now we're controlling the influx of resources. We control how food is distributed. We control how medicine is distributed, right? We control where you live. Essentially, we are putting you in a box and controlling every aspect of your life. And this is also always done under the guise of quote unquote public security or self-defense. We're defending ourselves. Or what will happen if we don't? And then becomes what we would actually call the extermination phase, unfortunately. Okay. And here's the really difficult part, that oftentimes this is done under the guise of quote unquote, this is just war. This is just military action. Okay. But when you are carpet bombing a civilian population over and over and over again, indiscriminately, when massive amounts of children and innocent women and men are being murdered, that is now genocide. But they use this language of, well, this is military action to once again desensitize. The whole point of genocide and how they get the world to become complicit is using different language and different concepts to get you to not look at this as for what it is. Okay. But once again, when we are indiscriminately killing innocent civilians, this is now genocide. And this is now where we are in Gaza. Okay. Shirin was in this group. Her husband is stuck in Gaza right now. He watched his little 9-year-old sister, unfortunately, get blown to pieces. Okay. There was a man that I've been following, who I've been engaging with. Beautiful man. Had his whole family in Gaza. He was murdered a few days ago. This was not someone who was a military combatant or anything of the like, and this is happening over and over again. And the last stage is denial. Once it happens, we pretend like it wasn't. We pretend like they deserved it. We pretend like they did it to themselves. And we see this right now, even with the Holocaust. This is why genocide is so hard to spot, because it actually does feel gradual. It is not just this mass killing that occurs all at once. It is step after step after step until suddenly there's a breaking point that's been reached and we feel like it's too late. And each step is done in a way that numbs the public consciousness a little bit more, so we are desensitized from what is going on. And so that we somehow are rationalizing their suffering. America often does this with populations in the Middle East because of what we're trying to do with the resources. The more that a group is dehumanized and not seen as human, the more that the public conscious is numbed and desensitized from us going in and committing atrocities. Okay. So like I said, we are in stage 8 and 9 in Gaza in terms of there being mass displacement, starvation, bombing of hospitals, schools, refugee camps, refusal of humanitarian aid, and language of extermination used openly by state officials, right? And that this is trying to be normalized by the American government. Okay, this is why it's important to pay attention. Netanyahu, who is the prime minister of Israel, who is carrying this out, is considered a war criminal in just about every country in the world except America. In almost every other country he would go to right now, he would be arrested on the spot. In America, he's not. In America, he can actually currently speak to our Congress, and recently has. And once again, this is how we normalize this. So how do we interrupt the process? We call out dehumanizing language early and often. Anytime we see a group of people being termed e like evil or terrorists, anytime you see children being robbed of the ability to be seen as humans, you name it immediately. You center the humanity of the targeted group over and over and over again. And we must support whistleblowers and moderates and those who are speaking on their behalf. We must do everything we can to protect journalists who are speaking out on this. We must continue to give them black platforms. We must continue to center them at all costs. If they're being banned, shadow banned, blackballed, whatever, we do everything in our power to uphold them and to continue to give them voice. All right. Bisan is a great example right now for anyone who follows her in Gaza. She's a Palestinian who is recording everything, and they're doing everything in their power to make sure her videos don't get out, right? And I also believe, I don't have the exact statistics in front of me, but what makes what's going on in Palestine and Gaza so bad is that I believe they've murdered more journalists than at any point since World War II. And it's like indiscriminately. So that's what they're doing, is they're doing anything to silence any real information about getting out. And so while it is important to monitor our intake on social media has been an equalizing force in this because it is given us a resource to where Israel cannot hide everything, which is turning the tide here. So what is the spiritual basis for genocide? It's things we're already going over, but we'll touch it and go deeper. How does a group of people get to a point where they are committing mass murder amongst another group? These very same inner work principles that we do on ourselves, they apply on a collective level, and it is the rejection of the shadow. So when there's unhealed trauma, rage, shame, and fear, and we do not face it, we don't work with it, we will project it, we will put it onto another. So we are good, they are evil, we are civilized, they are savages, we are chosen, they are cursed. It is due to this denial of the darkness to integrate the darkness, which then creates this culture of purity. See, real spirituality, right? Real inner work, real reconciliation does not seek purity, it seeks wholeness. But this is what often leads to like what we call religious fundamentalism, right? Or these like religious wars is this fixation on purity. We reject the shadow and we're quote unquote trying to keep ourselves pure and clean. And so typically we do this on an ideological basis around nationality or race, right? And that's what happened in Nazi Germany. And as I said, this is considered divisive. I don't believe it is, but this is now what's happening with Palestine-Israel. Okay, Israel is a Jewish ethno-state. That's, once again, not controversial. They will tell you that themselves. But anything that is seen as like impure or doesn't fit into our ideological basis is a blemish, a stain, a contamination. That's literally what created Nazi Germany. So genocide becomes a ritual purification, a dark sacrament based on the lie that violence can quote unquote make us feel better or purer or clearer. Collapsing of the heart. Genocide cannot occur if we are turned into our empathy, if we are turned into love. Okay. But this is why propaganda is the main factor in allowing an atrocity like this to be carried out. I see the Israeli Nazi Germany or Rwanda or anything with these genocides that have happened throughout time, there's always mass propaganda campaigns to make you look at the other person as if they're not human, to completely close your heart. And often they use these notions of safety, or you're under threat, or we're under danger, that these people are nothing but a violence to our threat, to our safety. And so immediately our own fight or flight systems come online, and our ability to be in that ventral vagal part of our nervous system, to be connected, to be in our heart, goes offline. You cannot justify the slaughter of children unless your heart complex is completely closed off. Once again, it is engineered through fear, humiliation, shame, and propaganda. The hijacking of myth. So every culture has their stories, right? Every culture, we have our things that we speak to it about what happened to famous leaders or this or that. It's important. Every culture needs their stories, needs their mythology. So it brings us together. But what happens is when these become a way to weaponize and turn against itself. Um, a lot of times in what's going on in Palestine, we hear like old scripture from the Old Testament being weaponized that, Jews are the chosen people and this is our land. It is being weaponized in a way it's the hijacking of these stories, of this mythology to carry out mass violence. Okay. We must protect our holy land. Our ancestors were suffered, so we're allowed to dominate. God gave us these territories. They are Amalek. They are devils. They must be wiped out. It's desecrated mythology. It's the soul's language, but it has now been hijacked by ego and pain. And once again, finally, what happens is these people, we project all our shadow onto another to make them the scapegoat. How many of us grew up in a family dynamic where we were the scapegoat of a potentially narcissistic family, where mom, dad, brother, and sister were insanely dysfunctional, and we were the ones who were calling out or could see through it. And so then all those traits were being poured onto us, being projected onto us, because they didn't know how to look at themselves. This is what's going on a collective level. Okay. And so it's this belief that if we remove their presence, we will be safe. If we eliminate this other person, we'll be whole again. But it's a fallacy. And it's rooted in the inability to take responsibility for oneself or look at oneself. So the scapegoated party carries the unconscious sins of the dominant group. They are slaughtered so the perpetrators do not have to face themselves. And so lastly, we have the abandonment of spirit in favor of control. So genocide arises when a culture worships control over communion. Instead of learning how to live with others, we decide to eliminate differences to once again protect this illusion of safety. And this is the soul's betrayal of choosing power over presence and annihilation over nuance. And we've already touched on it, but it's the inversion of the sacred, the hijacking of myth, the taking the things that are sacred to oneself and distorting it to justify mass death. So before we go on to how we heal, I just want to give everyone space to sit with it. I'm not going to call on anyone, but I just wanted you to give you a minute to just kind of sit with that, see how it impacts you, see that how it hits, see how that affects how you interpret and see what's going on in the world currently. Maybe it brings some things up from your own ancestry, your own backgrounds. But we all have to come together to collectively figure out how we stop this. In the 21st century, there should be no reason why we're murdering each other in genocide. I'm not going to call on anyone just yet. I'm going to go through the rest. Okay. So, how do we begin to heal this? That's the big question, right? So many of us are watching what's going on in the news, right? We're seeing the images, we're seeing what's happening, we're seeing everyone speaking up, right? Some of us are even trying to contact our senators, our congressmen, the people that represent us to try and stop this. And sometimes it feels futile, sometimes it feels powerless. But where are the areas that we are in control, where we have power, where we have say? Grief, grieving the shadow. So when internal pain goes unprocessed, as we said, we blame it on another. Healing path is collective grief rituals, spacious for nations, people, communities to grieve their own wounds, losses, and betrayals without blaming someone else. Creating rituals to name intergenerational trauma as sacred, not something to avenge, but something to transmute. Stories, speaking, letting our experiences be seen, telling the truth of what was lost without making that pain righteous ammunition. Well, this happened to me, so I can use no. Allowing the grief of what was lost to be seen and processed. This releases this energetic compulsion to quote unquote cleanse something beyond yourself in order to feel better about ourselves. This is the biggest problem with what we see in today's world, on today's media, on social media. Notice yourself getting stuck in very extreme binary thinking. That's what genocide thrives off of. Chosen versus good versus evil, us versus them. Binaries offer simplicity in a complex world when we don't have the logical capacity to hold, simultaneous truths, even truths that seem contradictory. We go into binaries to make things seem simple for us. When we're in fear, when we're dysregulated, we will go into simple binaries. That's why, like I said, it is important to incorporate this inner work, to incorporate the ability to work with ourselves, to notice these fear responses, to notice the shame, because if we're stuck in that, that's what leads to this extreme binary thinking that we're not going to be able to pull ourselves out of. So, healing path, non-dual education and trauma literacy, teaching adults and children to sit in contradiction, to hold both pain and accountability, both trauma and impact. And we have to go back and we have to deconstruct binaries in theology, nationalism, identity politics. We have to go back. We have to deconstruct even our own American history. Where are we stuck in this propaganda for the last 250 years of us versus them, or America's American exceptionalism? We're always the best. How does even this propaganda, these binaries on a subconscious level enable us to consent to what's going on abroad in a number of ways? Training communities in conflict transformation, somatic regulation, so we don't collapse when we're in conflict, when we're having these difficult discourses. Disentangling purity from the sacred. Like I said, this is what we often see in religious trauma. So when a culture confuses purity with holiness, we demonize diversity, we idolize bloodlines or borders, we associate moral worth with sameness, obedience. Okay, this distortion turns into genocidal ideology and makes us feel righteous. So we have to return to the mystical heart of every tradition where God and spirit does not divide but unifies, and really stay focused in that aspect. We uplift the mystics, the peacemakers, the prophets within traditions who were silenced by state religion and conquest. That violence, mass violence amongst innocents is not what allows us to be sovereign and free. So once again, we must interrupt inherited violence. And a lot of people are bringing up these great points. Heidi even brought it up. Genocide is often transmitted trauma, ritualized through education, stories, monuments, holidays, militarization, denial. Children are born into narratives that tell them who to fear, who to hate, and who deserves to live. So our healing path is ancestral reckoning and collective initiation. Nations themselves must undergo their own rites of passage, not into war, but into truth. We have truth-telling ceremonies where suppressed histories are voiced and not hidden and held space for. Public acknowledgement of harm, like South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation, but we actually have a deeper emotional, somatic, and spiritual integration, not just on an information level. We notice where once again we are giving scripts to our children of fear, of otherness, and diffusing and dismantling that. So we'll cover these last ones quickly because I want to give us time. So we must cultivate moral imagination, not just moral rules. Laws and rules are important, but laws and rules themselves can be distorted and corrupt. Giving everyone access and connection back to their own moral framework, to their own ability to open their heart and to intuitively know this is not right, this is wrong. Okay? So this is all about embodied empathy practices. Art, literature, theater that break our heart open. Education rooted in lived experience, not just abstract facts. We need cultures of moral imagination where people learn to weep for strangers, not just those they're connected to through a bloodline level. We must restore the sacred web. Genocide occurs because we lost connection to our world and to everything. It's a spiritual disease, and we must reconnect back to a reciprocal relationship with our earth, with our community, with spirit, with ourselves. Very last thing we'll cover. The opposite of genocide is not peace. It's not staying silent. It's not staying quiet. The opposite of genocide is wholeness. Peace without justice is silence. Justice without healing is revenge. Healing without truth is illusion. So, to stop genocide, to stop harm on a collective level, we must build cultures capable of holding grief, contradiction, and difference, not as threats, but as material for transformation.